Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30th anniversary of the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies. I am Dr. Katrin Bastian, Research and Policy Analysis Professor here at the Marshall Center and your Master of Ceremonies today. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the playing of the national anthems of the Federal Republic of Germany and the United States of America by the Gebirgsmusikchor of the Bundeswehr in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Please be seated. At this time, I would like to introduce our guests of honor and distinguished guests. Please hold your applause until all have been recognized. Ms. Rachel Ellehus, the Secretary of Defense Representative in Europe and the Defense Advisor for the US mission to NATO. Mrs. Natalia Pinchuk, spouse of Ales Bialiatski. Lieutenant General Martin Schelleis, Chief of the Joint Support and Enabling Service Bundeswehr. Major General Barry Seguin, retired US Air Force, Director of the Marshall Center, and his wife Nancy. Dr. Robert Kennedy, former Director of the Marshall Center, and his wife Vivona. Mayor Elisabeth Koch, Mayor of Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Mayor Stefan Merkel, Mayor of Greinau. Mr. Florian Streibel, Member of the Bavarian Parliament. Mr. Timothy Liston, US Consul General in Munich. Brigadier General retired Tim McAteer, Marshall Center US Deputy Director. Brigadier General retired Rolf Wagner, Marshall Center German Deputy Director. Our distinguished members of the Friends of the Marshall Center. A very special welcome to all the participants of the program on applied security studies that is starting today. We have 86 participants from 45 countries that have just arrived at the Marshall Center yesterday and today. And to all distinguished guests, friends, faculty, and staff, welcome and thank you for joining us today and virtually to celebrate this milestone. The George C. Marshall Center for Security Studies emerged from a binational collaboration between the US Department of Defense and the German Federal Ministry of Defense. After the failed coup in Russia in August 1991, the need for an institution to foster defense and security ties with emerging democracies in Europe and Eurasia became apparent. On June 5, 1993, the Marshall Center was established here in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Through our programs, we have built a global alumni network of nearly 16,000 participants from 160 countries. Over the past 30 years, the Marshall Center has committed to addressing the most pressing security challenges facing Europe, Eurasia, and North America. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Dr. Robert Kennedy, former director of the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies from 1997 to 2002. Please, Mr. Kennedy, come up on stage.
General Seguin, General Sillis, honored guests, Ms. Spinchuk, staff and faculty of the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies, Dr. Urban, Bürgermeister, and friends of the Marshall Center. Good to see so many of you here today. And the many distinguished guests, members of the Gewürztraminer Music Corps, members of the past class. It is my pleasure to be back here at the Marshall Center at this momentous occasion of the 30th anniversary. Over the past 30 years, this center, a symbol of a great German-American partnership, has done much to help many of the nations grow a better understanding of the complex issues that confront our nations and many other peoples around the world. However, on this 30th anniversary, it is not so much a time to look back at Marshall Center successes as it is a time to look forward to the challenges that we now confront and those that we are likely to confront in the future. Following the end of the Cold War, the world was full of hope. That hope that a new day had dawned, that the footprint of peace and prosperity and cooperation that had come to characterize the North Atlantic community of nations would extend across the face of Europe and Eurasia and elsewhere around the globe. There was a hope that wars driven by ideologies or the desire for territorial conquest would be replaced by the common sense of dialogue, discussion, and agreements based on the rule of law. Sadly, such hopes have been temporarily dashed. Today, we are confronted with multiple challenges that you, members of this class and others that are with us today, are very much familiar with. Crime, corruption, drugs, ethnic and sectarian conflicts, cyber threats, pandemics, climate change, the potential use of nuclear weapons by terrorists or others around the globe, and so on. However, at present, the war in Ukraine and the prospect of conflict with China over Taiwan or China's aggressive behavior in the South and East China Seas are foremost in our minds. As you look towards solutions to these two critical issues, let me offer just a couple of comments. First, Russia and its war of aggression in Ukraine cannot be allowed to succeed. Russia is in direct violation, as you know, of the UN Charter and of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. If Russia's military aggression is allowed to stand, others will be tempted. And the post-Cold War framework for peace will have collapsed. More is at stake than meets the eye of some of the people in some of our nations. Second, we must realize that the true end game is Russia's reintegration into the rule-abiding community of nations. Only when Russia becomes a normal member of the European community and the Asian community will our nations security be assured, and will peace and prosperity prevail. Moreover, working together with Russia, the Atlantic community, and other nations, we can find together a better solution for the problems that we confront. Concerning China, I would suggest one thing to keep in mind. If you want to make an enemy, call him an enemy. There is little doubt that many of our countries see actions taken by China as very troubling. It's regularly threatening actions toward Taiwan, its 9, now 11-dash line, its refusal to abide by the ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, its failure to abide by the rules of the World Trade Organization, and so on. It is strategy to be prepared for conflict while seeking to resolve the issues that trouble us. It is folly to create an enemy. Managing the emergence of China as a great power may be the most significant challenge of the 21st century. I think it also is important to note that the developing world is losing the narrative in the global South. If the wealthier countries of the so-called West wish to remain relevant to too much of the developing world, they must acknowledge the negative impact of some of their policies toward these countries, policies which have too often failed to meet the needs of the developing countries and have created an aggravated turmoil. Ladies and gentlemen, successfully addressing these issues will be your task for the 21st century. Each of you can make a difference. What each of you does, and perhaps more importantly, how you go about doing it, can and will determine the future of Europe, Eurasia, and global peace and security. Working together, you can forge a more stable, more secure, more prosperous tomorrow. This center, the Marshall Center, is about cooperation. The Marshall Center is founded on the notion that in an increasingly interdependent world, we must work together. If we are all to be successful in dealing with the challenges that lie ahead. The Marshall Center is about knowledge, learning about other nations, other peoples, and the issues and challenges that they confront, the perspective that they share among themselves about what's going on in the world, which very much depends on their history, their traditions, their geography, and other factors. And if we do so, we will be able to fashion joint strategies to deal with the challenges ahead. The Marshall Center is about overcoming national, ethnic, gender, religious stereotypes which frequently serve as barriers to effective communication and dialogue. The Marshall Center is about values, the sharing of values to grow values. We don't always share values to begin with. It is very important to realize that we grow when we share our values with others through our dialogue and through cooperation. The Marshall Center does not have the answers to the challenges that you will confront. The Marshall Center can just but raise the questions, help identify some of the options, and together come to a better understanding of the hazards that lie ahead. But the way ahead will not be an easy one. There are no well-marked roads, no unambiguous road signs that depict the easiest or the best way ahead. Foresight for you all will never be 20/20. Your every step will be marked with challenges. To each of you falls the task of creatively addressing the challenges ahead. If there is one message that the Marshall Center hopes you will take back with you, it is that no individual, no country, no people have all of the answers all of the time. But working together, we can find a better path to the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Lieutenant General Martin Schelleis, Chief of the Joint Support and Enabling Service, Bundeswehr.
General Seguin, distinguished guests, verehrte Damen und Herren, es ist meine Ehre und Freude, heute anlässlich dieser 30-Jahr-Feier zum Bestehen des George C. Marshall Center ein paar Worte sagen zu dürfen und 2 Auszeichnungen vornehmen zu dürfen. Diese besondere Dienststelle, George C. Marshall Center, ist unter den besonderen Dienststellen der Streitkräftebasis ein Unikat. Sie wurde gegründet vor 30 Jahren in Anlehnung an das Wiederaufbauprogramm für Europa des ehemaligen US-Verteidigungsministers George C. Marshall. Es soll beitragen, oder dieses Center soll beitragen, zu einem stabilen gesamtstaatlichen Sicherheitsumfeld. Es soll demokratische Institutionen und Beziehungen fördern, aktive Sicherheitskooperationen festigen, dauerhafte Partnerschaften zwischen Nordamerika und Europa bauen und insbesondere die bilaterale Partnerschaft und Freundschaft zwischen USA und Deutschland. Wie macht man das? Und Dr. Kennedy hat es gerade erläutert: Menschen zusammenführen, gemeinsames Verständnis schaffen, Netzwerke aufbauen und pflegen und Lösungsansätze für transnationale Sicherheitsprobleme erkennen. Diskutieren, wie es weitergehen kann und sich auf Optionen einigen. Es geht darum, ein kooperatives, ein regionales und schließlich dann auch ein globales Sicherheitsumfeld aufzubauen. Und nicht zuletzt transnationale Freundschaften zu knüpfen. Und das ist in diesen bewegten Zeiten wichtiger denn je. Und wir haben gerade die Zahlen schon gehört: 16.000 Absolventen der diversen Angebote, die es hier gibt. 162 Staaten mittlerweile haben Vertreter gehabt. Das ist fast der ganze Erdball in 30 Jahren. Meine Damen und Herren, ich will das nicht alles wiederholen, was Sie schon gehört haben und auch besser wissen als ich, aber ich habe, wie gesagt, die große Freude, 2 Personen, die sich um das George C. Marshall Center und um die darauf aufbauende deutsch-amerikanische Freundschaft besonders verdient haben, auszuzeichnen. Und mit dem Ehrenkreuz der Bundeswehr. Dieses Ehrenkreuz bekommt nicht jeder, sondern man muss dafür schon außergewöhnliches Engagement über einen längeren Zeitraum beweisen und das weit über normale pflichtschuldige Dienstpflichten hinaus. Auch Zivilpersonen können mit dem Ehrenkreuz der Bundeswehr ausgezeichnet werden, wenn sie besondere Verdienste um die Bundeswehr im unmittelbaren Zusammenwirken mit Soldatinnen und Soldaten erworben haben. Und ich bitte nun nach vorne Herrn Professor Matthew Rhodes. Und ich denke, der Applaus nimmt die Bestätigung vorweg, dass Sie diese Auszeichnung verdient haben, Herr Professor. Sie sind Dozent für nationale Sicherheitsstudien hier am GCMC und haben einen bleibenden Eindruck hinterlassen. Sie sind bekannt für Ihr großartiges, außergewöhnliches Engagement. Seit 20 Jahren sind Sie hier als Dozent für nationale Sicherheitsstudien tätig. Sie sind stellvertretender Leiter der Abteilung für regionale Sicherheitsstudien, Programmdirektor des deutsch-amerikanischen Seminars für regionale Sicherheit und des Forums Südosteuropa. Bevor Sie hier kamen, also vor über 20 Jahren, waren Sie Assistant Professor für internationale Sicherheit am US Air War College, davor Assistant Professor für Politikwissenschaft am Central College und davor akademischer Mentor der Jan-Hus-Stiftung an der Palacký, ich hoffe, das ist richtig ausgesprochen, Universität in der Tschechischen Republik. Ihre Fachgebiete sind Außenpolitik der Vereinigten Staaten, transatlantische Beziehungen, Sicherheitsdynamiken in Mittel- und Südosteuropa. Und hier Ihr Schwerpunkt Ihrer Lehr- und Forschungstätigkeit ist der westliche Balkan. Da gelten Sie als weltweit gefragter Experte und ausgerechnet in diesen Tagen und Wochen, wenn man nicht nur Kosovo, sondern auch Bosnien-Herzegowina sieht, spitzt es sich ja wieder zu. Ein ungelöstes Problem. Deswegen kommt es auf Experten wie Sie an, um das zu analysieren und gute Lösungen vorzuschlagen. Ihr großes persönliches Engagement bei der Planung und Organisation von Partnerschaftsprogrammen in In- und Ausland hat die multinationale Zusammenarbeit und eben insbesondere auch die binationale Zusammenarbeit zwischen USA und Deutschland gefördert. Und zudem leisten Sie bei internationalen Veranstaltungen regelmäßig exzellente Arbeit zur Vermittlung sowohl der deutschen als auch der amerikanischen Position der Sicherheitspolitik. Sie haben sich, Herr Professor, damit in besonderer Weise um die Förderung der deutsch-amerikanischen Partnerschaft, ich möchte sagen Freundschaft, verdient gemacht. Und ich darf Ihnen jetzt das Ehrenkreuz der Bundeswehr in Silber aushändigen. Und ich bitte zumindest die Uniformierten aufzustehen. Im Namen der Bundesrepublik Deutschland verleihe ich Herrn Professor Matthew Rhodes, Vereinigte Staaten von Amerika, für besondere Verdienste um die Bundeswehr das Ehrenkreuz der Bundeswehr in Silber. Bonn, den 17. August 2023, der Bundesminister der Verteidigung, Boris Pistorius. Vielen Dank. Nehmen Sie bitte wieder Platz, Herr Professor. Jetzt wird es gefährlich.
Ja.
Jetzt wird nämlich dieser Orden auch noch angepinnt. Sie brauchen starke Nerven.
Ja, okay. Habe ich.
Das ist jetzt vollständig. Ja.
Sure.
Ja.
Ja. Okay, good. Ja. Oh, das ist, muss ich ein bisschen passen. Das ist besser. So.
Herzlichen Dank.
Vielen Dank.
Herr Professor. Eine Auszeichnung kommt selten allein und ich habe die ausgesprochene Freude, noch einen draufzusetzen. Und ich bitte nach vorne Herrn Generalmajor außer Diensten Bear Seguin. General Seguin, die Welt des Militärs ist auch noch nach 31 Jahren aktiver Dienstzeit immer noch Ihr Zuhause. Sie sind aus der US Air Force ausgeschieden vor ziemlich genau 3 Jahren. Im Range eines Generalmajors haben eine Reihe von herausragenden Positionen bei den US-Streitkräften bekleidet. Zum Schluss hatten Sie die Position, und das ist jetzt hart für den Übersetzer, der stellvertretende Stabschef für strategische Einsatzplanung im obersten Hauptquartier der alliierten Streitkräfte Europa in Belgien. Ich glaube, es war der DECO Strategic Deployment Shape. Und deswegen würde ich vorschlagen, dass ich die amerikanischen Bezeichnungen auch im Original vortrage, weil das ist dann wirklich etwas schwierig und manchmal drollig. Sie sind seit gut 2 Jahren der Direktor hier am George C. Marshall Center, unter anderem verantwortlich für das Angebot an Präsenzprogrammen, an auswärtigen Programmen, an Sprachkursen und an Aktivitäten des internationalen Alumni-Netzwerks. Sie haben Ihre Ausbildung erstaunlicherweise in Potsdam begonnen. Allerdings nicht bei Berlin, sondern in den USA, New York State. Sie haben das Reserve Officer Training mit Auszeichnung absolviert, sind 1989 in den aktiven Dienst eingetreten, haben eine glänzende fliegerische Laufbahn absolviert. Sie waren Line Pilot, Sie waren Fluglehrer, wieder so eine deutsche Übersetzung, Sicherheitschef des Geschwaders, ich würde sagen Flight Safety Officer. Und Einsatzoffizier, haben auf Staffelgruppen, Geschwaderebene geführt und auch ein Kommando über eine Air and Space Expeditionary Task Force. Einige besondere Stationen. Sie waren Commander der 9th Air and Space Expeditionary Task Force in Afghanistan. Sie waren Director Strategy, Engagement and Programs, US AFRICOM, Stuttgart. Sie waren Commander 31st Fighter Wing, Aviano Air Base, kleiner Unterschied unter Experten. Sie waren Inspector General im Headquarters Air Combat Command und der Executive Officer des Vice Chief of Staff der US Air Force. Und bevor Sie die schon erwähnte letzte Funktion hatten bei SHAPE, waren Sie Commander 14th Flying Training Wing im Air Education and Training Command und schließlich Senior Special Assistant des SACURE, also eine wirklich tolle Laufbahn, bevor Sie dann nach der aktiven Dienstzeit zur Krönung dieses Amt hier übernahmen. Sie lieben Multinationalität und den Geist, den Spirit dieses Centers. Und mit Ihrem Engagement haben Sie außerordentliche Verdienste um die deutsch-amerikanische Partnerschaft, um die Freundschaft, um die Bundeswehr erworben. Sie haben unter den besonderen Bedingungen der Corona-Pandemie, und da sind wir uns erstmals begegnet, die methodische Weiterentwicklung der Programme unter diesen besonderen Rahmenbedingungen vorangetrieben, den Aufbau eines globalen Expertennetzwerks zu den Themenbereichen internationale Sicherheitsstudien, Außenpolitik und Verteidigung erfolgreich vorangetrieben. Und in Ihrer Führungsverantwortung, Herr General, haben Sie beispielhaft vorgelegt, wie man Partnerschaft pflegt, wie man Freundschaft baut und sich deswegen ebenfalls in herausragender Weise um die deutsch-amerikanische Partnerschaft und Freundschaft verdient gemacht. Und ich habe die Freude und Ehre, Sie jetzt mit dem Ehrenkreuz der Bundeswehr in Gold auszuzeichnen. Und ich darf Sie wieder bitten, sich zu erheben. Im Namen der Bundesrepublik Deutschland verleihe ich Herrn Generalmajor außer Dienst Bear Seguin, Vereinigte Staaten von Amerika, für besondere Verdienste um die Bundeswehr das Ehrenkreuz der Bundeswehr in Gold. Bonn, den 11. Juli 2023, der Bundesminister der Verteidigung, Boris Pistorius. Herzlichen Dank, meine Damen und Herren. Herzlichen Glückwunsch. Nehmen Sie bitte Platz. Danke. Ich glaube, das können Sie auch im Sitzen beobachten. Weil ich muss jetzt hier nur ruhiger an. Und ich darf Ihnen auch noch... Sir, General. That's the small version for you. Herzlichen Dank, meine Damen und Herren. Das habe ich Ihnen mitgebracht. Ich wünsche Ihnen, wenn Sie hier am Center arbeiten, weitere erfolgreiche, gute 30 Jahre und allen anderen einen schönen Empfang im Nachhinein. Vielen Dank.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Martin Schelleis, and congratulations to Dr. Rhodes and Major General Seguin. We'll pause for 1 minute to give Ms. Rachel Ellehus the opportunity to connect online. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce Ms. Rachel Ellehus, joining us virtually. Ms. Rachel Ellehus currently holds two important roles: as the US Secretary of Defense representative in Europe and as Defense Advisor for the US mission to NATO. Ms. Ellehus is joining us virtually from Brussels today. We're happy to have you with us. Thank you. The floor is yours.
I hope everyone can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you. It could be a bit louder, but we do hear you.
Excellent. Well, I will try to speak a bit more loudly and maybe move a little closer to the microphone. In any case, so thanks for inviting me here today. I've been to the Brussels Center on several occasions. It's always a wonderful opportunity to get away from your daily work, whether that's in ministries, Pentagon in Washington, or NATO headquarters. So I know that's a good spot to foster good ideas and good questions. Today I was asked to talk about security developments since 1990 and beyond, and effects on security policy and education. I'll steer away from the education side of things, but I can certainly talk a little bit about NATO's evolution from that post-Cold War period in the 90s through to today, and how some of those features that developed over the intervening years are still with us today. I usually begin my talks on NATO by pointing to the fact that the secret to NATO's longevity is, in fact, its ability to adapt to the needs and demands of its members and to the security environment. And I think as we walk through this evolution today, that will be apparent, and that's exactly what has happened. So just going back to that post-Cold War period in 1991, the alliance was really emerging from decades of a deterrence and détente approach, where it really just sat behind its own borders, tried to keep Russia at an arm's length, tried to deal with a very shaky security situation on the continent of Europe, and tried to keep the US and the Canadians in North America engaged in rebuilding that defense and security structure in Europe. So the 90s come, and after decades of that more defensive posture of deterrence and defense and sitting back, there was really a sense that hopefully we were in a new era. We started to talk about enlargement of the alliance. We started to talk about the possibilities of dialogue and cooperation with countries, including Russia. And they started to look a little bit beyond its collective defense mandate to focus a bit more on multinational crisis management. Many of you probably recall that the early 90s was the period when we started to see a lot of instability and unrest percolating in the Balkans in southeastern Europe. And so NATO was sort of looking on its periphery and wondering if this posture of kind of sitting back and waiting for the problems to come to them was really the most responsible approach given the security environment. And in that intervening period of 1991 to about 2010, which I would characterize as this developmental period in NATO's growth, we had three strategic concepts. We had one in 1991, one in 1999, and then one in 2010. And then we didn't have another one until 2022. So you're getting them with some frequency during that period, and then we get a big gap. But if we just look through those three strategic concepts, I think we can draw out some trends. So in 1991, we have what's the fifth strategic concept for NATO. And again, with that environment that I just sketched out for you, NATO is taking a view of expanding its security relationships across Europe through partnerships and cooperation. So we see things like the Mediterranean dialogue start to become something that NATO is interested in. There's a very low focus on nuclear weapons, and there's attempts to enter into a lot of arms control agreements and reduce talk or about the use of nuclear weapons to the minimum levels. And NATO is really trying to stress its defensive nature during this period, and again, lean into dialogue and cooperation. And go towards the end of the decade in 1999, which marks the 50th anniversary of the alliance, we've seen all the wars in the former Yugoslavia having erupted across the decade. And again, NATO's view of its responsibilities are really being challenged. This idea that we only have a responsibility if one of our member states within the North Atlantic area is attacked was a little bit outdated in a way. And countries could see that there was a link between what was going on in Southeastern Europe and the commitment of the alliance to the security and defense of its member states. So you get a definition of a wider Euro-Atlantic area, and NATO starts to talk about out-of-area discussions. Now, what happens along with that is and I'll come back to this because this is sort of key to where we find ourselves today. When NATO starts to talk about out-of-area, it moves a little bit away from defense. So it moves away from heavy standing units. It moves away from sort of static capabilities, and it starts to build enabling capabilities and rapid reaction forces. On the industrial side, it starts to produce things just in time rather than having stocks sitting on the shelf as it did in the Cold War period. So the whole posture that underpins the alliance and the guts that make NATO work are becoming much more oriented towards out-of-area operations like peacekeeping, peace enforcement, crisis management. And again, I'll come back to that because it's having an effect on the alliance today. But in this period, we get a broader definition of security. You probably talked about it in the course. The right to protect becomes a concept that is a basis, a legal basis or a principle upon which NATO can act outside of the territory of its member states. And new risks start to come to the forefront, things like terrorism, ethnic conflict, human rights abuses, political instability, weapons proliferation, all things that NATO really, for the first half of its lifetime, hadn't really thought was its responsibility. So it's being challenged to really add crisis management and cooperative security to the list of its core tasks alongside collective defense. Then if we then take another top or two in a decade, in fact, 2 decades to 2010, to the 7th strategic concept. Of course, we've had 9/11 happen earlier in that decade, the first use of Article 5 in defense of a member, in this case, the United States. And the threat of terrorism and weapons of mass destruction is really front and center. But again, the alliance finds itself operating out of area. So those trends that I talked about before with just-in-time production, lighter rapid reaction forces, focus on enabling capabilities to get you to the area rather than collective defense, that trend continues. And I guess the only other thing I'd say about that latter period is we do get a little bit of a taste of things to come. We start to see the emergence of new threat areas like cyber attacks start to rear their head here. The effects of environmental disasters and NATO's role in responding. Georgia in 2008, the Russian invasion of Georgia is almost a preview of things to come and maybe a harbinger for many that, the idea that NATO could choose what conflicts it wanted to be involved in and that there wasn't sort of a state-based existential threat to the alliance, that premise is being challenged a little bit. But again, disappointingly, at the beginning of the 2010s, I think NATO was a little bit head in the sand. It was still hoping for a better world. It was still hoping for that cooperation and that cooperative relationship with Russia. And it didn't really want to see Russian intentions for what they are. So when we get the attack on Georgia in 2008, you don't see a big reaction from the alliance. It's really first in 2014 with Russia's invasion of Crimea that the alliance wakes up and goes, wow, okay, maybe we do have to move collective defense to the top of that list ahead of crisis management and cooperative security. So that's kind of where we've been since 2014 onward. We've been trying to reset the table to get back to NATO's core purpose of collective defense. So for those of you who've been following the NATO summit in Madrid last year and the NATO summit in Vilnius here in July, you'll notice that we've done a couple of things. We have changed our posture. So NATO now has a lot more posture forward along the eastern flank of the alliance. And the idea is that this idea of deterrence by punishment, where we would allow an adversary to take the territory and then we fight to get it back, it is kind of a bit outdated. That's what, leaders have decided, that we need a much more a combination of deterrence approaches. And so deterrence by punishment had to be joined by deterrence by denial. So having those forward forces would deny adversaries, in this case Russia primarily, the ability to get to the NATO territory in the first place. So our posture changes. At the Vilnius summit, we just changed our planning as well. So NATO now has very domain-specific and region-specific plans. This is exciting because allies will know where their forces are expected to fight according to which regional plan. And over time, they will be able to align their national defense planning and capability selection systems to that specific front, either alone or in cooperation with others. So the new plans, because they are so region specific, can drive more specialization and regional cooperation. And they're much more directive to chiefs of defense and others in terms of what is expected, both in place host nation forces, but also those reinforcing forces in the case of a conflict. I'd say the alliance in the last two summits has also become a little bit sharper in terms of thinking about deterrence on resilience and how you can have the best posture and plans, but if your electricity grid and your embarkation points are complicated at the very outset and you're suffering major cyber attacks and your communications are disrupted, you're not going to get very far in executing those plans. So deterrence by resilience has sort of gone up the list as well since 2014, and then even more aggressively since Russia's renewed invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So again, since comparing it to the 1990s and that evolution through the 90s and the 2000s, the message I leave you with is this return to collective defense and resetting that table to be able to move away from that just-in-time production, to move away from a focus only on expeditionary capabilities and light units, and sort of back to the core business of the alliance. Unfortunately, in the interim, new challenges have emerged alongside that state-based threat presented by Russia and the pervasive challenge of terrorism. We now have a China challenge. If you look at the 2022 strategic concept, it talks about how China's stated ambitions and coercive policies challenge allies, even within SACEUR's area of responsibility. And this gets back to things like supply chain vulnerabilities or resilience aspect that I just talked about. We don't even have to think about NATO's role in the Indo-Pacific. We just have to, as many say, look above our heads and we can see the role of China in Europe. So that is something the alliance is grappling with, even as it's trying to reset its capabilities towards collective defense, which is not easy and it is not cheap. At the same time, we've got a broader definition of security that's reemerged, looking at climate change. The 2022 strategic concept mentions climate change and human security as new areas that NATO needs to be occupied with. And then emerging and disruptive technologies. They present both opportunities to make our existing capabilities more effective and introduce new capabilities into the fight, but they also present a challenge if our adversaries are able to move more quickly forward in implementing these emerging technologies than we are, and are less scrupulous, frankly, in terms of the rules of the road and the guardrails they impose on the use of those capabilities. So again, I think what I'll leave you with, and then I'll pause, is just this idea that we're in a place now where NATO is trying to do this reset to collective defense, even as it continues to try to adapt and modernize to the world around it. And if I had to extract some aspects from the 1990s that have endured today and have been sort of consistent throughout that period, I'd leave you with six. The first is that NATO is a defensive alliance. If you look at the capabilities and the posture, it really is, even though it's been active outside its own borders, that has been because there is a perceived challenge to the security or stability of its member states. So that defensive aspect really has not changed. That has been consistent. The second is a dual track approach. I talk to a lot of people and they say, well, NATO is a military alliance. Well, in fact, if you look at the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO is both a military and a political alliance. So that convening power is another thing that has been consistent throughout this entire period of NATO's history. That collective defense commitment would be the third thing that has been pervasive. It's been joined by those those additional core tasks over time, and it's risen and waned in prominence, but collective defense has always been the core of this alliance. Fourthly, this idea that we need to have effects across domains. Even in the early 90s, there was a sense that capabilities that were not necessarily conventional military capabilities could affect a game. So that could be economics or diplomatic pressure or space-based capabilities. All of these things have forced NATO to look outside very conventional lens in terms of deterrence and defense. And then finally, cooperative aspect of NATO. NATO has developed a broad swathe of partnerships over time. Some of those are countries that are in the Euro-Atlantic area, like Moldova and Bosnia and Herzegovina, who still would like to be members of NATO someday. Others are further afield, like our Indo-Pacific partners, who just want to find those synergies and sharing lessons with NATO allies. And then some of them are regional partners, like the Mediterranean Dialogue and the Istanbul Cooperation Initiative partners along our southern flank, who are part of that cooperative security aspect. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize how much the European Union has developed over this time. If we go back to those early 90s, Europe was in quite a bit of disarray, and we really didn't have a common security and defense policy, much less, a defense industrial policy that was really putting out the capabilities that we see now, for example, with regard to the EU support to Ukraine. So a lot of evolution in this period, but I think we can point to at least 5 things that are pretty consistent in the story of NATO. And with that, over. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Elahus. Thank you for making the time in your busy calendar to address this distinguished audience on this special day. Thanks very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the director of the George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies, General Retired Barry Seguin.
Happy 30th, George C. Marshall European Center for Security Studies. I say that jubilantly because we have much to celebrate, past and present, many and great contributions over 30 years. But I say so too in a bittersweet way, with full realization that we have alumni of the George C. Marshall Center who continue to pay the ultimate price, fighting for the common values that are foundational to who we are and what we do here at the Marshall Center. More on that to follow. I do want to extend a warm welcome to our many distinguished guests. And I know all have been introduced, so I won't spend a lot of time doing so, but a special thanks to Ms. Elahus for her address all the way from NATO headquarters in her role representing our Secretary of Defense in the United States. To Dr. Kennedy for being with us, Director from 97 to 2002, to Ms. Pinchuk, who we'll introduce momentarily, our many community leaders that we have with us, as well as the Friends of the Marshall Center. So good to see so many friends yet again, and our partners who are with us. Very special and humble thank you on behalf of Matt and I, General Shalais, for the honor, a humbling honor of the medals bestowed on us today. Speaking personally, I can say that I thought my days of receiving medals were over. And speaking, I think, on behalf of Matt and I, it's with great realization that while bestowed on a person, it's representative of also what's foundational to who and what we are, the German-American partnership, the value we all place in that, and the value that we place in the transatlantic partnership. The transatlantic partnership, which is absolutely central to our collective nation's security. Thank you for the humbling honor. We accept it on behalf of a grateful team. Thank you, sir. Also like to welcome our program on Applied Security Studies participants. As already talked about, the course started today having sat in your seats in 2006, I know the tremendous experience you're about to go through, and as I talked to you this morning, I'm truly envious. This is the longest course that we have at the Marshall Center, and we call it our flagship course. So we're looking forward to the next 10 weeks together as we educate, engage, and empower. Over the last 30 years, indeed, we have educated, engaged, and empowered security partners to collectively affect regional, transnational, and global challenges. We've done so through what I call our greatest strength, our in-resident programs, through our outreach, and through nurturing our alumni network, now 16,000 strong from 162 countries around the globe. All of this has led us ever closer to recognizing and accomplishing our vision of a unique German-American partnership and trusted global network, promoting common values and advancing geostrategic solutions. As we reflect back today on the legacy of the Marshall Center, we really need to look no further than our greatest outcome, our trusted global alumni network. Thousands of individuals have walked through our doors and have both arrived and departed committed to the common values which are foundational to the Marshall Center: democracy, freedom, good governance, rule of law, peace and security, conflict prevention, and human rights. To truly appreciate the significance of our greatest outcome, I think we need to go back and remember the backdrop, a lot of which Ms. Alahus and Dr. Kennedy already highlighted, of the origins of the Marshall Center. Those origins hail from regions where the iron grip of totalitarianism was felt daily by the citizens of their countries and loomed large. Life under communism was a continuous struggle for personal freedoms and basic human rights. Individual liberties were sacrificed in the name of state control. Individuals who dared to dream of a more open and just society faced surveillance, harassment, abuse, imprisonment, and even death. For our alumni, the Marshall Center truly became a beacon of hope, a place where they could learn about the common values that are baseline to everything here at the center, and also experience them firsthand. It was a place where they could freely engage in discussions, challenge ideas, and build lasting connections based on mutual trust and shared aspirations. For a brief moment in time, as already described, we all hoped and believed our world had changed once and for all, that countries that came out from behind the Iron Curtain would truly join the world of free nations and democratic societies, and most of them indeed did. But some never abandoned the authoritarian mindset and the ambitions to expand empires. Oppressive regimes wield significant power, but they cannot silence those who strive for freedom and are willing to sacrifice anything for it. Their resilience cannot be overpowered, and there will always be those who dare to speak up. Today, I'd like to share a story of one of our alumni with you, an alumni who dared to speak up and has paid a significant price, demonstrating incredible courage in the fight for democracy and freedom. This individual's fight for human rights and freedom extends back to 1980s Belarus, a very dangerous time to speak up. A staunch advocate for freedom and democracy, he championed human rights, free speech, and the rule of law despite facing the regime's relentless pressure. His commitment to these common values have caused he and his family to pay a very high price. He has been the beacon of light for so many throughout Eastern Europe. In 1996, when Lukashenko gained dictatorial powers through a constitutional amendment, many protested and demonstrated in the streets of Belarus. The authorities cracked down hard on the protest, and many people were jailed. This brave individual, this brave Marshall Center alumni, founded the organization Viasna, or Spring, to provide support for incarcerated demonstrators and their families. His human rights organization documented the authorities' abuses against and torture of political prisoners. From January to May 2000, he sat in the very seats that you're sitting in right now as a member of our executive program and someone who then joined our trusted global network of alumni. He attributes his Marshall Center experience through the voice of his wife, whom I was privileged to have dinner with last night on his 61st birthday. He attributes the experience here with empowering him to develop like-minded networks based on the common values that he was committed to fight for. For his activities, the Belarusian government authorities sought to silence him and stop his work to protect human rights. In 2011, he was sentenced to several years' imprisonment for alleged concocted tax evasion charges. He was released in 2014. In June of 2021, he was jailed yet again when massive demonstrations against Lukashenko's dictatorship following the elections in 2020 broke out, and he was falsely accused of counterfeiting to fund those protests. In March of this year, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison on fabricated charges. The U.S. and the European Union both condemned his trial as a sham. In 2022, while he was still in prison and remains in prison, he was the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Ladies and gentlemen, it is truly my humbling and distinct honor to announce the recipient of the first ever Marshall Center Distinguished Alumni Award as we celebrate 30 years of common values for which our alumni fight for. I give you Mr. Ales Bialiatski. We honor Mr. Bialiatski's work as a human rights activist in Belarus, his unwavering commitment to common values, not the least of which are democracy and human rights, have made a profound difference in his country and indeed beyond. Mr. Bialiatski's courage serves as a testament to the enduring spirit of those whose sacrifices inspire others worldwide to continue the struggle for fundamental rights and freedoms. He truly embodies the spirit of the Marshall Center. Unfortunately, Mr. Bialiatski cannot receive this award in person. You see, he's still illegally imprisoned in Belarus today. His wife, Ms. Natalia Pinchuk, has graciously agreed to be with us and has traveled all the way from Norway to Germany to accept the award on behalf of her husband. Ms. Natalia Pinchuk is a passionate advocate for human rights herself, who continues his work and her own while in exile. Her resolute commitment to shedding light on the persecution of dissidents in Belarus makes her a true freedom fighter. Despite being far away from her homeland, she remains a strong and influential voice and is raising awareness about the pressing human rights issues faced by her fellow Belarusians. Ms. Pinchuk, thank you so very much for being with us today. I kindly ask you to join me on stage, and on behalf of the Center, thank you for all you and your husband do to support the cause of justice and freedom.
Шановне господарство, вялікі дзякуй за гэтую узнагароду, якую сёння я атрымала з вашых рук. Вялікі дзякуй кіраўніцтву Цэнтру Маршала за гэты акт салідарнасці з Алесем Біляцкім, а ў яго абліччы і з усімі палітычнымі вязнямі Беларусі, з усім беларускім народам, які прагне вызвалення ад прамаскоўскай дыктатуры. Алес Біляцкі сёння адзіны ў свеце нобелеўскі лаўрэат за кратамі. У гісторыі былі адзінкі такіх дэманстратыўных выпадкаў. Адыёзны, несумненна злачынны рэжым Лукашэнкі разглядае лаўрэата Нобелеўскай прэміі міру як свайго небяспечнага ворага. А Алес свой выбар зрабіў на пачатку свядомага жыцця. Яшчэ ў антыкамуністычным падполлі ранніх 80-х гадоў. Ён змагаўся за свабоду і незалежнасць Беларусі. Алесь перакананы, што наша краіна гістарычна належыць да еўрапейскага і еўраатлантычнага свабоднага свету і мае ў яго вярнуцца. Нягледзячы на тое, што яе адтуль гвалтам вырывае суседняя імперія, якая, як бы яна сябе не называла, ці то расійская, ці то савецкая, ці то пуцінская. Але ў 90-е годы, нягледзячы на старанні свабодалюбных беларусаў вярнуцца ў заходнюю цывілізацыю, наша краіна не паспела. Калі прыйшла чарговая дыктатарская антыбеларуская ўлада, рэжым Лукашэнкі, Алес Біляцкі стаў праваабаронцам. Гэта цяжкая, рызыкоўная, часта руцінная праца. Але ў жніўні 20-го году Алесь быў натхнёны і нават шчаслівы. Тады беларускі народ зрабіў свой бачны ўсяму свету выбар. Мільёны людзей адмовілі дыктатару, прагаласавалі за прадстаўніцу дэмакратычных сілаў Святлану Ціханаўскую і выйшлі на вуліцы і пляцы. Лукашенка пры падтрымцы Пуціна пачаў масавыя расправы. Алес Біляцкі свядома застаўся ў краіне, разумеючы, што яго чакае помста рэжыму. Бо ён верыць у канчатковую перамогу свабоды і дабра. І я вельмі спадзяюся, што вераць у беларусаў і нашыя сябры на захадзе, што яны адрозніваюць беларускі народ ад рэжыму, які трымаецца цяпер на расійскіх штыках і падачках, здае суверэнітэт Беларусі дзеля самазахавання. Лукашенка не Беларусь. Сапраўдная Беларусь, свабодная і адкрытая. Беларускае грамадства ненавідзіць дыктатуру і ніколі не пагадзілася на выкарыстанне тэрыторыі краіны Расіі для агрэсіі супраць нашых добрых суседзяў украінцаў, супраціўляецца гэтаму як можа. Таму сёння гэтую свабодную Беларусь спрабуюць знішчыць і растаптаць. Гэта небачная вайна. Прынамсі, 22 удзельнікі пратэстаў былі забітыя падчас мірных акцыяў альбо даведзеныя да смерці ў няволі. Палітычных вязняў больш за 1500, але гэта толькі засведчаных праваабарончымі арганізацыямі. Па праўдзе, іх у разы больш. У бальшыні гэта высокаадукаваныя людзі, эліта, будучыня краіны. Людзі атрымліваюць неймаверныя тэрміны зняволення да 25 гадоў. У зняволенні немаладыя, хранічна хворыя, шматдзетныя маці. У закладнікі захопліваюць родных і блізкіх, актывістаў і лідараў. А адначасова знішчаюць беларускую нацыянальную ідэнтычнасць. Я выступаю перад вамі па-беларуску. Гэта прынцыпова, і дакладна так зрабіў бы Ales Bialiatski. Суд над Алесем і ягонымі паплечнікамі быў фарсам. Абвінавачаных трымалі кайданках і у самой клетцы. Алесь папрасіў весці паседжанне па-беларуску. Яму адмовілі. Памецілі тэрыторыю. Беларусь пад уладай Лукашэнкі – частка расійскага міру, для прыходу якога расчышчаецца прастора. Алесь асуджаны на 10 гадоў. Яго атапавалі ў калонію, якая мае жахлівую рэпутацыю, як канвеер здзеку з палітычных вязняў. Усіх палітычных вязняў абвяшчаюць экстрэмістамі і нашываюць жоўтыя налепкі на уніформу. Нічога не нагадвае. Калісьці такое ўжо было ў гісторыі. Але ён не зменіць сваіх поглядаў. І Алесь з іншымі палітвязнямі і Беларусь у цэлым абавязкова будуць вольнымі. Падтрымка дэмакратычнай супольнасці на гэтым шляху неацэнная. І менавіта яе прынцыповая палітыка павінна зрабіць немагчымым лёгкае існаванне рэжыму. Алесь з удзячнасцю узгадваў час, праведзены ў цэнтры маршала. Для яго гэта былі інтэлектуальна насычаныя спатканні з аднадумцамі, якія ўмацавалі яго перакананні ў непазбежнай еўрапейскай і еўраатлантычнай будучыні Беларусі. Ён высока ацаніў тое, што ў цэнтры, як аўтарытэтным аналітычным асяродку, разумеюць стратэгічную ролю Беларусі. Калі б свет падтрымаў дэмакратычную рэвалюцыю ў Беларусі ў 2020 годзе больш рашуча, хто ведае, ці рашыўся Пуцін на новую агрэсію супраць Украіны ў 2022 годзе. Ales Bialiatski павінен быць вызвалены з вязніцы. Але разам з ім, безумоўна і неадкладна, павінны быць вызвалены тысячы іншых адважных беларускіх мужчын і жэншын, кінутых за краты і-за жаданне бачыць сваю краіну вольнай ад дыктатуры і расійскага паняволення. Час просьбаў і намёкаў даўно прайшоў. Гэта павінен быць ультыматум, бо увязненне можа абернуцца для кожнага смерцю за мурамі. Свабоду Алесю Біляцкаму, свабоду ўсім палітычным вязням Беларусі, свабоду Беларусі. Дзякуй за ўвагу.
Thank you, Ms. Pinchuk, for your inspiring presence and commitment to the cause of human rights. Your dedication serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of our shared values. Let us remember that the fight for freedom and democracy is a collective endeavor. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our ceremony. We are grateful that you could be with us here today to join our historic event and the 30-year history of the George C. Marshall Center here in Bavaria. We invite you to please join us downstairs in the Adenauer Hall for a small reception. Thank you.